Hi, I'm Laura Galán-Wells, and I write science fiction and fantasy novels and short stories that are inspired by Mesoamerican mythology and Mexican culture mostly, and just general nerd culture. Right now, I'm very recently on submission with my young adult novel, which is a science fantasy. And I'm working on developing or editing a middle grade novel. And I have a comic book coming out in the fall called Molds, which is an origin story for a superhero in a new universe with Chispa Comics under Scout Comics. So that's what I'm up to. So I had kind of an unusual querying journey where I had a 45% request rate in the end across my two novels, because I did start querying the middle grade novel while I was still querying the young adult novel. And I got, I don't remember the exact numbers, but in the end, I had queried 189 agents with the young adult novel, and checking my notes, 48 with the second. And I ended up getting very lucky and getting an offer on my first novel. So this was this past fall. So while my querying is still pretty fresh, it was 13 months that I was querying. I am going to relay some of what I've heard from everyone. So a lot of this is going to be kind of averaging out what a lot of writers and agents' opinions are that I've read or heard. So I've compiled 40 questions about querying and R&Rs. And so that's what we're going to see is a little slideshow I prepared. If you're curious about how I got my agent story, that's on my blog at lauragalanwells.com. And all right, let me get started here. Share. All right. So here's my little first screen. And here we go. So how do you know when you're ready to query? So for this, I'm actually going to give you several resources that I would recommend that you do or hit or use before you start querying. So generally people say you just really are never quite ready. It's never going to be perfect, but you do want to get it as perfect as possible. I definitely started querying before I knew I had gotten it quite as ready as I could, maybe. And that was reflected in that I got some R&R requests pretty early on, but also further in. So when it was very polished. So I would just say, get it as polished as possible. Some ways to do that is you could find betas and critique partners. Those you can find sometimes through Twitter. There's occasionally a pitch kind of event on Twitter where you can find critique partners. You can try just straight up asking, hey, does anyone else write this and that and want a critique partner? There are Facebook groups that are specifically for betas. You just go on there, search betas. Some people do hire someone through Fiverr, which is Fiverr, or editors. But there are ways to do it for free if you're tight. You can do craft books. Stein on Writing is one that I use that helped me edit a lot and cut down filter words and other things. And then I also use the Software Pro Writing Aid towards the end. That one has a little sub-program called where it gets rid of sticky words. And those are basically your filter words. So it helps you just chop all unnecessary words. So the more, I think that's the main thing I see now when I'm beta reading for other writers, especially newer ones, is when you first start writing, you don't realize how many words are unnecessary. You can just chop. So chopping filter words, you can also just find long lists of these if you look around on Google. The other thing is you could just find different writer exchanges within general writing groups. So, and in those, I would say Google Docs is probably the most common one that's used, just because it's very user-friendly, it's free, you don't have to buy it. And my little tip there is to make sure that it's switched to suggesting mode, not editing mode, because in editing mode, someone can accidentally just chop a big section or something. I mean, hopefully you have a copy, it's not your original, but just in case. So just generally, I wrote down some things that you might want to think about before querying. Are your characters differentiated? Are all your plot holes filled? Are you using physicality to show emotions versus telling us what their emotions are? Have you cut filter words? Have you added sensory world details? Have all your important characters been described? Are your settings described versus characters existing in a blank room in space? And do you have an appropriate word count for your novel's age group and genre? And then also you just want to look up what the proper manuscript format is. That should be pretty easy to Google too. All right, so moving on. Should I have a website? So I actually talked to my agent about this, and she said she definitely looks for the website of writers she's getting a little more interested in. So I would suggest just get a free website. There's free programs out there. You can also just have something as simple as one of those little link trees, but just try to have something so that you have something they can search. You don't have to worry about social media with fiction. If you are writing nonfiction, that's a different story. They do want you to have a platform or at least show expertise in your area with articles and that kind of thing. But if you're writing fiction, you do not have to have a social media presence. I would say Twitter is a good bare minimum to have, just because it's where a lot of the writing community is and communicates. Another place is Reddit, but that's not really where agents would be searching for you. Okay, can I query before the novel is ready? This is not a good idea because it's possible to get a request on the very first day. And generally, agents don't mind if you submit later, but it's good to send it when they are excited and your query is really fresh in their mind. Okay, where can I find examples of queries? Okay, so there's a website called Query Shark. And Query Shark is by an agent who has posted, like she has people send her queries and then she dissects them on this website, on this blog. And her rule is you have to read all of them before you send yours for potential feedback. I never did send her mine, but I did read the entire thing. And there is just a plethora of examples. There are so many. I recommend everyone read every single one if you have the time. And then Eric Smith is an agent who has queries that were successful of his clients, and he also kind of dissects them at this link. That's really useful too. Okay. And how long should a query letter be? So people say like, this many to this many words. I think a good rule that I've seen a lot is under 300 words. So personally, I chipped mine down until it was 185 words just for the parts about the story, and 286 words total with bio and stats. So I just chopped and chopped and chopped until it was under 300 words. So the thing is here, you want to lead with your hook. Personally, I like to have just a 2-sentence thing that is just a very intriguing statement, or kind of what the mystery or what the exciting, unique thing is about your story at the very top, just to hook them. And then just maybe 2 more little paragraphs where you cover everything else. Again, you want to look at these, Query Shark and so forth about the queries, but just consider that they're just looking down your query for a few seconds and you need to just be able to hook them fast. So you want to have very specific, unique details, and less is more. All right, where can I go to get free feedback on my query? And I'll just briefly mention there are places you can get feedback like from agents, like Manuscript Wishlist and Inked Voices are two that I know people use a lot. But if you're very tight on your budget, like most of us, you want to get free feedback, a couple places that are really great are there's the Subit Club on Facebook. That's SUB space IT space CLUB. And then on Reddit, there's a subreddit or a group of Reddit on Reddit called Pub Tips, PUBTIPS. Just make sure you follow their instructions very, very carefully on how you submit your query, because they do have very strict rules on that. And there's a couple of Discord groups where you can get query feedback and where you'll find a lot of writers that are all kinds of different stages. One is WriteHive, which is, the mother hub for the WriteHive conference. Another one that I joined very early on that has a lot of very supportive, helpful people is called Let's Get Published. That's also on Discord. All right, should I list requests from agents and editors? So this is actually something that comes up a lot, usually because in the UK, it is somewhat common for the agents when they ask for a full to ask you to tell them how many other fulls you have or other partials fulls. This is not common in the United States. I've never seen it in the United States. I have seen it in the UK from UK agents. So generally in the US, I would say unless you have a really unusual amount of requests, maybe probably don't mention it. But UK agents may want to know that number. You can definitely mention it though. There's no harm in mentioning it with American agents too. It's just not usually what they want to see. But again, if it's a really high number, it might get them more interested to read faster. All right, should I mention my awards / mentorships, grants I've received? Yes, absolutely. You're the product. You should hype yourself in your bio, include all that stuff. Should I mention if they've rejected a previous novel's query, partial, or full? Generally, the advice I see is no. I will say in a few cases, I queried so back to back because I did start querying my second novel when the first novel was also still out with some people. And they remembered that they'd rejected my novel. Two said they would want the full, but I probably wanted someone else because they didn't want to rep my first novel. And then when the third requested the full, a third agent, I specifically asked and they said, it's probably better for you to send it only if you've exhausted other avenues, because I would not want to rev your first novel. So, and these were cases where they had read significant amounts for my entire novel. So, that's maybe a bit of a different situation. But that is something you might want to ask too. If someone read more of the novel, like, would you rep that? Because you may not want an agent that would never want to rep your shelf novel or your backlist. Your backlist is what you call novels that you've written in the past that you're not currently querying. So some agents will happily just work on those manuscripts, even if they rejected in the past. So it's just something to keep in mind. If they said to submit to them in the future, you might want to mention that. There may be cases where maybe the timing was off, but they still wanted to see more from you. So they didn't necessarily hate your novel, like maybe they really, really loved it. It just, they had something similar, or they didn't think it worked in the market right then. So I guess just don't assume anything, just ask, but you don't necessarily have to mention that they've rejected anything in the past. If you decide to query them, just query them. All right, should I include content warnings? More and more queryers are including these, and you can Google content warnings to see examples. And generally, I see people adding those at the very, very end of the letter after the bio paragraph. So way at the end, just a little list of these are my content warnings. So do I have any organizational tips before querying? Okay, no one has ever asked me this, but I'm going to tell you anyway. So one thing I loved to do that was great was for each novel, I created a bookmark folder on my browser. And I dragged all my little Google Docs in there that were related to querying, and it just made it so much faster. So in that little bookmark folder, I would have my query, my 1-page synopsis, a 2-page synopsis version, because sometimes they want 1 versus 2. My first 5 pages, my first 10 pages, my first 20 pages, and my first 50 pages, because different agents want different amounts of pages. And also my full manuscript. And another thing I had was a document that had answers to all the frequently asked questions on Query Manager. Stuff like, who do you think is the audience of the book? What books would sit next to yours? What was your inspiration for writing this book? Or why did you write this book? Or why are you the right person to write this book? That kind of thing. That way you can just quickly grab them and copy paste instead of thinking of all those answers over and over again. And then also I used a very meticulous spreadsheet where I kept all the agents. I still made tons of mistakes. I'll talk about that later, but it really helped to have all the agents there. You know, I basically had columns for agents, a little notes on anything I'd heard about them, the agent, what agency they were, date received, the date they rejected or requested. And then I would just copy paste their rejections or requests emails in there, like what the content was. And this was mostly to help other people, because eventually people start coming to you and asking, you know, how do have you heard of so-and-so, or what was your experience with so-and-so? So that's good for just comparing notes, etc. All right, should I query in batches? I would say that everyone does this completely differently. Most people will set out to send out maybe 10 to 20 queries at first, something like that. And then each time they get a rejection, they send a new one to replace it until they reach at least 100. 100 is a number that a lot of people use. It is completely arbitrary. But for a lot of age groups and genres, that may be kind of when you exhaust the number of agents that are active. And so it's a good, nice round milestone. Some people use a reward system or like a little star chart where the goal, it's seen as like a goal, a positive thing to get to 100 rejections. Because, you know, there's all those sayings about, you know, you have to go through the rejections before you get to the yes, so forth. So yeah, I recommend something like that. It's just really satisfying to check it off or put your star sticker or whatever to get to 100. I did query up to 189, I think I said, something like that. So I kept going, but those first 100 is just a nice goal to try to get to. All right, what is a good request rate? That's really hard to say. I know if you see some YouTube videos from people who queried years ago, or you watch old YouTube videos, they would say these very huge numbers, like 30%, 40%, 50%. Mine was pretty good, but mine was really, really, really unusual just because I had very compelling hooks and they were intrigued. I did look on Query Tracker, and the average request rate, and this is people who use Query Tracker, so these are the more probably plugged in writers, you know, with what's going on. They have a 6.3% request rate on average. Also, I did note that the average query is querying 45 agents. So again, please don't get stuck on my suggestion of 100 queries. That's just what a lot of people use as kind of a goal. But you know, you can choose to stop querying at any point, obviously. So it looks like the average person queries 45 agents on average. So there's some that do less, some that do more, but that's just self-recorded. So they might just not be recording everything too. All right. So and just 6.3% average request rate, meaning some are higher, some are lower. It's perfectly normal also to just have no requests. I know several people where they didn't get any requests until they finally got one, and that was the one that got them an offer. So experiences are just all over the place. All right, how can I research? How can I research agents? So there's a few different ways. One is Publishers Marketplace. It is pretty pricey. I think it's something like $25 a month, but don't quote me on that. There are also free ways to find out what agents might like. There's you can go on Twitter and look up the hashtag MSWL with the agent for that agent specifically, and a lot of agents will use that hashtag to talk about what they like. You can go to manuscriptwishlist.com. You can use Query Tracker. Again, this is a website, I think it's like querytracker.net, where you can go and you can either pay for premium or not pay for premium. And it just shows you which agents are available, what they like, just their preferences. If you pay for premium, you can see other people self-reporting when, at what point the agent rejects them or requests and that kind of thing. You can also go to absolutewrite.com. That's absolute, ABSLUTEWRITE.com. You can Google them. You might find interviews people have done on podcasts or YouTube, etc. And of course, all the above mentioned writing groups across Facebook, Twitter chat groups, Discord. It's really good to network. Reddit to find out things about agents. Okay, so even if, I just want to make a note, even if MSWL is a match or manuscript wish list, it might still be a rejection. So just keep that in mind. I know how easy it is to get excited and see something that's really similar to novel and be like, oh, this is my dream agent, or they're really going to like my novel. But consider that every single concept can be written 1,000 different ways. Well, don't panic if another writer has a similar concept. Also, the main thing is going to be just the voice, really, your unique writing style, and they can usually tell pretty quickly if they gel or don't with it. That's just very subjective. Everything in this is very subjective. The longer you are in it, the more you realize there's just always hundreds and hundreds of talented writers querying at the same time, and a lot of this is luck. So, okay, but now I'm rambling. Back to my slideshow. All right. How do I decide which agents to query first? So I'd primarily look at how long agents take to respond, which you can find out through Query Tracker or by asking around, and do a mixture of fast and slow responders. There's a chance you might get feedback from the fast ones, but so few agents give personalized query rejections that it might not mean anything at all if you only get forms. And nowadays it's way more likely that you will get forms on query rejections. I did ask on I did a little poll recently on my Twitter, and it was like 47% of people had never gotten a personalized query rejection, and 5 to 10% of people, 47% of people had gotten a personalized rejection on maybe 5 to 10% of queries. So it's just extremely rare. It used to be super common, apparently. I started writing during the pandemic, so I've only seen kind of the, I guess, pandemic and post-pandemic rates. Most query rejections are going to be forms. And the thinking here is that if you get early repeated feedback, as in multiple agents are saying the same thing, and you vibe with what they're saying, you may want to decide to revise. And the slow responders might not have gotten to your work yet, so you could send them a new version. So, that's that's where they say a mix of quick and slow. Quick can kind of give you an idea of how your query is performing, but again, it's hard to have any data because so many send forms. It used to be an easier way to see how you're doing. Like, don't panic, you're not getting anything personalized. But you still have those slow responders in there. That way, if they take 6 months, 9 months, 12 months to get back to people, like you have plenty of time, you know, if you end up getting an R&R or doing a huge revision. When you're deciding who to choose within an agency, you really just have to go with your intuition. So, you know, choose a mix of how fast they take to respond. You kind of want the faster responders in the agency usually, so you know, don't wait a year before you can query the next one. And do they even respond? Some agents will only respond if you send them a notice that you have an offer. So you probably want to figure out which ones those are, because they can block your access to an entire agency and you'll never be able to query anyone else there again, unless you withdraw your query, but that's a whole nother story. Okay, and you know, look at their wish lists too. You know, a wish list match may be more important than the agent's reputation or whatever else. All right, should I query a second manuscript at the same time as the first? I did this. I just started querying the second one to agencies that I'd completely exhausted, where there was no one left to send the first one to. It was pretty messy when I got an offer on the first novel, and then had to tell the ones with the second novel about it. I ended up having a lot of agents request the fulls of both. Yeah. So I think in the end, probably nobody actually read both because there's not much time to read after you notify them, but nobody was like, I hate you, why are you doing this to me? Either they requested just one or they browsed through the second or whatever. It was not a big deal at all. Okay, so 17, is getting a lot of form rejections a bad sign? So I already talked about how it is pretty common to get no personalized form rejections. I mean, no personalized rejections on a query. Even fulls nowadays are often form rejections. Whereas I understand that before the pandemic times, it was like almost all of them would be personalized. And that's fine. There's no judgment here on my part on agents. It's better that they get through everyone and give you some kind of feedback. And often, in my opinion, it's better if it's just a very simple rejection. There's an agent who's famous for just saying one little sentence, something like, this isn't for me, thank you, or something like that. I love that by the end, because it's so hard to know if a rejection is a form and you might read too much into it. You know, if you think it's personalized to you, again, go to Query Tracker, and sometimes in the comments, people will leave what the rejection is that they got, and you compare it to yours. Sometimes agents will have a handful of different form rejections they choose from. So they might choose the one that's like, the pace was too slow, I didn't connect to the writing, you know, stuff like that. Like, the more you query, the more you start to recognize what's form language. This means they didn't necessarily read past the first chapter. They might have, but they also may have just read one chapter or just half a chapter, just a few lines, and then just picked from their form rejections. And this is just a way for them to save time so they can respond to as many people as possible, which is a good thing. So I would say it's perfectly normal to not get personalized query rejections. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with your novel. When it happens with partial or fulls, also perfectly normal. You just don't know how far they've read, unfortunately. I think that's the biggest wish list for writers. If any agents are listening, like, if you could say what page number you got to, that would be so helpful. Okay. 18, how do I know if a rejection is form personalized or semi-personalized? I kind of already talked about this. And I would say, just remember that all the feedback is subjective, even if it is personalized or semi-personalized. So you want to look for patterns. and I'll talk about this a little bit later maybe, but I mean, I ended up getting, like I said, 9 R&Rs, and they had opposite suggestions at times. More romance, less romance. The pace was too slow, the pace was too fast. It's just that subjective that different agents will give you different advice. So don't go making drastic changes until you have seen a pattern. Okay, so 19, is there a best time of the year to query? Okay, so there's a lot of different opinions on this from writers and agents. If people are going to say that there is the best time of the year to query, they tend to say January, kind of mid-January, is when a lot of the agents open up that close for the holidays. I have seen it to be advantageous that if you possibly can, that you query right when they open. Because sometimes they'll just shoot off a few requests that first day because they're really excited to look at their inbox again. And then I would say it would slow down for the summer. A lot of publishing just shuts down completely or slows down dramatically for the summer, with a lot of agents and editors taking 1 to 2.5 months off, kind of through the school summer time when kids are out. There's like a slowdown in June, July, August. There's a big book fair that distracts a lot of people. And then somewhere around August, September, a lot of agents open up that post for the summer. And then there's another slowdown for the holidays in the United States. Since most agents are over here, we have a Thanksgiving break. About a week, a lot of people take a week off, and then Christmas, and around there when there's a lot of other holidays too. So a lot of people will just kind of pause their querying in mid-November. My personal thought, I'm of the other philosophy. I say just query as soon as you're ready to query that agent. Generally, that's what I did. If you query, I don't know, December 4th or something, and they don't look at their queries till January, you're still going to be there sooner than someone that queried when they opened after the holidays. So that's just very individual. Okay, that's 19. 20 is, can you query more than one agent at the same agency? Usually yes, but not at the same time. And some are going to have limits, such as no from one is no from all. So what that means is if you query one agent and they say no, it's no from the entire agency. More and more, it seems like agencies that did that are not doing it as much. There's been a lot of criticism in the past that it just adds another gate. Especially because it's so subjective as to whether an agent will like your work. So it's getting rarer, but just keep an eye out for that. Some have limits of like you can only query a max of 2 at the agency, or you can query 2 at the same time. So just keep an eye on that. Note that Query Manager shows agents who you've queried from their agency, so make sure you've withdrawn a query before you submit another. I had a case where an agent notified me they were auto rejecting all their fulls for life reasons, but they didn't close out the QM. And I didn't realize because we'd been talking on email by then. And another agent then thought I was trying to query more agents than I was allowed for that agency. And so I've seen this happen to other people. It's really upsetting when they close out the Query Manager and you just have no way to explain what happened and why you're querying another agent there. So be aware that can happen. A similar situation is when an agency shares one email. Look carefully to see what their rules are. When they say you can email the agency at large or a specific agent, sometimes they give you that option. It seems like people are more likely to get requests when they specify an agent and don't just leave it open to the whole agency. This is just completely very specific to what I've seen. I could be completely wrong. It just seems that way to me from what I've seen. Okay, so generally I found those back in those emails that there's just one person that reads for the whole agency, really awkward. I really wish agencies would move away from that. I've had like unusual situations with pitch requests or referrals or R&Rs, and those emails were more likely to go unanswered. So the best case scenario is an agent from one of those agencies gives you their direct email. Okay, so should I reply when rejected? Generally, I'd say no if it's a query rejection. And when I say I would say no, I just mean generally people say you should say no. You shouldn't. But it might be nice to send a quick thank you if the agent has read your partial full and given personalized feedback. Some agents I have seen say they appreciate a quick note. Others will say they prefer not to have the extra email. So it's perfectly okay not to reply at all. Most people don't, like I said, but it's up to you. Okay, 22, how do you ask a question if query manager has the note option closed? This happens a lot where people have to ask a question and you go to query manager and the whole thing's just closed down. So sometimes agents have that option toggled off and don't realize, or they close it out in a way that you can't ask a question. I've seen this come up when an agent will give a writer an R&R, like a revise and resubmit, and they want to ask clarifying questions, or they want to know how or when to send it to them. So normally in these cases, writers have luck just sending a message on Twitter or replying to a Twitter post asking the agent if they can ask a quick question. I've never seen an agent say no to anyone. And Instagram is another place you might find them, since not every single agent is on Twitter. And if you're absolutely sure the agent would want to hear from you again, you can also try a direct email. It may be listed on their website. All right, so next, should I query an agent who rejected me with the next project? So when asked, agents say you should continue to send future novels. I did share earlier about a few cases where they said not to, but generally, yes, you would want to. So like I said, past novel might have been wrong at that time, but they may want to offer on a future one. Especially if it was a query rejection versus a partial or full, like they may not have read too far, and they may be interested in maybe offering a dev edit for one that they rejected in the past, if they're a very editorial agent. Not all agents are editorial. There are some that just want it to be ready to go to the editors, but I think most are. Most will do a developmental edit or two with you and then a line edit before you send it off to editors. So, okay, I already told you all about that. Yada, yada, yada. Okay, another thought is you may want to try a newer agent at the agency that you didn't query with your first project, just in case was a voice or writing style mismatch. Not everyone's going to like every name. So, you may just not want to take the risk and just query them last when you start querying your next novel. If I have a pen name, do I have to query it with my real name? No, you don't have to give your real name until it's time to sign a contract. Some people include it in the bio. They'll say, hey, my real name is actually this, but you don't have to disclose that until it's time to sign things. Okay, should I use the agent's first name or last name? It's safest to use dear first name because you don't want to accidentally use the wrong honorific. So that's just safer. And I've seen multiple agents say just use my first name. It's fine. Just make sure the spelling is okay and watch out for autocorrect fixing names that don't need fixing. 26, should I personalize each query? Okay, so some people do this in hopes it'll make the agent more likely to read the query carefully, and it may. I mean, that could happen, but others feel like it will not make a difference, or it might make you too emotionally invested in that agent that you spent extra time on. The odds are that the agent will reject regardless of personalization, just because most queries are rejected. So agents seem split on this as well. Some say they like very specific personalization, like maybe referencing one of their clients that you like reading or something from their wish list. but not stalkerish. Like, you know, they don't want you to point out something that you saw in an Instagram from like a year ago. That's, yeah, that feels a little weird. So, and others say it makes no difference and you should just save your time. So again, this is just completely your preference. Just know querying is incredibly time consuming, and personalization is probably something that won't make that much of a difference, if any at all. Is it over if I make a mistake? Again, this is not a question someone has ever asked me, but you know, I just needed a question format here for my slideshow. Don't fret, agents make mistakes too when they're communicating with writers and when communicating with editors. Typos are not going to make an agent reject if they're occasional. I mean, obviously, if they're like peppered everywhere, that's a different thing, but they won't care about a typo here and there. So these are all the things I've done accidentally, and it was totally fine in the end. I've called an agent the wrong name. I've done that twice that I can remember. I queried 2 agents at the same agency by accident. I queried an agent whose query manager was linked from manuscriptwishlist.com, but they were actually closed if I'd gone to look on the website. I did get lucky there. They still requested. I made a spreadsheet entry error and thought an agent requested a full. So that was really embarrassing because then I sent her like, hey, I got an offer, and since you have my full, I thought you might be interested, kind of thing, and she never responded. So yeah, but you know, most agents will very graciously forgive you whatever error, and if they don't, then in my opinion, like they just might not be a good match for you, because everyone makes mistakes. That's just part of being human. All right, how is querying different pre-pandemic to now? I've kind of touched on this a little bit, but I'm told form rejections were more likely across the board, or are more likely now across the board for queries, partials, and fulls. And even R&Rs will sometimes never get responses and get ghosted. 29, how do you know when to give up on a query? You should check Query Tracker to see what the agent's average response times are. This may be a premium feature, I can't remember, but you can look to see if the agent has responded to people who have queried before or after you. But keep in mind that some agents do hop around reading one genre at a time. Also, they may have used a maybe, but not have had time to read your sample pages yet. And some can take up to a year longer to get to your query. You can also check their website, because some will mention if we haven't responded in X weeks, it's a no. But also several agencies will say that and their agents still respond after X weeks, or the agents say that. So this is another case where it can be helpful to be in writer groups to compare notes with people. Ultimately, it's a very individual decision. Some writers choose an arbitrary amount of time, like 3 months or 6 months or 9 months to close out a query. But again, some agents will take up to a year or longer to reply. So it's just, do you want to wait for them or not? And you know, you might want to move on to querying someone else and just withdraw. If nobody else has left a query, you could just leave it open indefinitely. Any open query is someone you can notify if you get an offer in the future. So that's something to consider. And okay, 30, when should I nudge an agent? This question goes for both queries and partials and fulls. Some people nudge at 6 months since the wait times are so long nowadays. It used the kind of like the number everyone threw around in the past was 3 months, but everything's just taking longer since the pandemic, and it seems semi-permanent at this point. So some people nudge at 3 months, then every 3 months thereafter. That's what I did, more or less. And some agents agencies will specifically tell you to nudge after a certain amount of time. Like I've had agents say, hey, if you don't hear from me within 6 weeks, just check back with me. Sometimes fulls get lost. This happened to me with a couple different agents where it didn't quite make it onto their Kindle, or they, I don't know, forgot about it or put it in the wrong folder. I had an agent who ended up reading my novel a few different times. She had accidentally sent me a query rejection instead of when she meant to request, and then noticed months later after a pitch contest or something. Okay, so here's my suggested nudge language, because I know that can be a little nerve-wracking. You could say something like, I sent you title on date. I'm unsure if you've had time to peruse, or if it's a no response means no situation. I didn't want to query a different agency at agency without checking in with you at the 3-month mark. That's something I've sent in the past. What do I do if they request a partial or full? Upload your manuscript to Query Manager, or attach it to an email, depending on how you communicated with the agent. They may give you a special link or email to send it to. They normally want the manuscript in .doc or .docx. So default to this, they don't specify. You can convert it to that format from Google Docs, Scrivener, and others. Some may want it in PDF form, but that's rare and they would specify. If they ask for 50 pages, that's considered a partial request. If they don't specify how much to send, just send the full manuscript. If in doubt, send the full manuscript. If they ask for synopsis, attach that separately. If they don't specify the length, send a single spaced one that is 1 page long by default. Some writers will include their query letter on the first page of the partial or full manuscript to remind the agent of what they requested, should they read like way later down the line. So that's a good thing to put in there. All right, how do I know when to shelve a book? This is entirely individual. A common benchmark I see is to shelve after 100 queries, like I said before, but again, this is just a completely arbitrary number. There are people who shelve well before that for numerous reasons, whether mental health or, well after 100 queries, if their genre age group combo has a large agent pool, or they get pitch requests that allow them to dip into an agency more than usual. Things like R&Rs not R&Rs, things like pitch requests and referrals will allow you to break those rules. All right, so keep in mind that no project is permanently shelved unless you want it to be. You may want to revise it in the future. You may get an offer on a future project, and shelved books are now your backlist to work on with your agent. So that can be a really good thing. Or you may want to send it out again to new agents down the line. You can submit it to small presses or self-publish it. I've definitely had friends that have gotten an agent on maybe their 2nd, 3rd, or 4th novel, and now they're working on dev edits on those backlist novels. So, that's something to consider too. So, all right, I'm going to shift to R&Rs for the last few questions. All right, what is an R&R? This is where the agent asks for you to revise and resubmit if you would like. So it means the agent is open to seeing your work again if you revise it significantly. What if you're not sure if it's an R&R? Okay, this I get asked a lot. So sometimes an agent will make it extremely clear that it's an R&R. They'll say, I would like to offer you an R&R, or I would like to invite you to revise and resubmit, or feel free to send this to me in the future if you do these significant revisions. But it can also be more nebulous, like, I wish the X had been Y. Please feel free to submit to me in the future. Do they mean submit this project, a different one? Or, anything between being very vague and being very specific. Sometimes their feedback is really specific and seems really fixable, but they don't ask for an R&R, and you wonder if they would reconsider if you made changes. In these cases, it's a good idea to check Query Tracker comments again to see if you're misinterpreting form language as personalized feedback. So make sure that it is very specific to your novel. Ideally, if it is personalized, they've given very specific details, like, I wish Jane had done this instead of that, or whatever. Generally, it doesn't hurt to ask if you're pretty sure that they're offering an R&R and their wording was a bit ambiguous. Just ask, was this an R&R? Would you welcome reading it if I resubmit? All right, how often do R&Rs result in offers? The figure I see floating around is that roughly 1 in 5 R&Rs results in an offer. This is very depressing, especially since some of these are straight up ghosts where the agent never reads it despite nudging. or leaves agenting before they do, definitely do nudge. As I said before, like manuscripts do get lost, or they forget about them, or they file them wrong, or whatever could happen. They could end up in spam. Like, make sure you don't think an agent is ghosting your R&R when they actually aren't even aware it exists. This is where you might want to step into direct messages to ask them, or email them separately and say, hey, did you receive that okay? That kind of thing. But even if the agent does read the R&R, they will often still reject. So even if they say it was executed just as they wanted. So you can read the details of the 9 R&Rs I received on my website, which I put at the beginning, if you're curious about that. So I had a lot of different things happen. But to summarize for this question, I had R&Rs from 8 agents. The ninth one was an agent who gave a second R&R after I notified of offer. So of those 8 agents, ultimately 2 offered and 6 did not. So I definitely had that experience that more rejected R&R revisions than offered. All right, 36. Should I do the R&R? This is very, very individual. Here's some things to consider. An agent who does not very obviously ask for an R&R, who doesn't give very specific instructions, might be less likely to connect with a new version. An agent who specifically asks for an R&R and gives very specific instructions might still reject, even after saying that you did what they asked you to. Are there any patterns in personalized rejections you're getting? Again, after making sure it isn't form language, or have you gotten more than one R&R? You may want to do a completely different major revision of your own, or you might want to combine things into one big revision. Will the R&R make your novel stronger while also not killing any own voices content that's deeply important to you? No, very rarely an agent might ask for an exclusive R&R. I've never seen this happen to anyone, but apparently it can happen. I would say you probably don't want to do this unless you don't have any other requests, and only if you're toward the end of your querying journey. So you might want to consider putting a time limit if you do that. 37, can I ask the agent for more guidance on the R&R? Absolutely, I highly recommend that. You don't want to go off and do tons of work and then realize the agent actually wanted something else. Or you may be willing to change some things and not others. You may want to explain to the agent why you want to keep something and ask if it would be negotiable. So when an agent gave specific instructions, I wrote an outline for how I plan to address each point, and then asked if the agent would be willing to look it over. They all seemed pleased to do so, or willing at least. And the more editorial agents went back and forth with me a few times until we both felt confident we were on the same page. You want to feel good about the R&R and know exactly what you are doing and why, because it's a lot of work and the odds are high that it will be rejected. So, but if you agree with the changes, it will strengthen your novel in a way, and it'll end with your vision. It will strengthen the novel. And if it is rejected, you'll still have gotten a free developmental edit, ended up with a stronger product. All right, should I tell agents with my query partial or full about my R&R? I would say that I've seen some people withdraw their queries with a note that they're working on an R and will resubmit. If it's an agent who's generally low communication with writers or takes a really long time to answer queries or only reads if you get an offer, then some writers will just choose to let them read whatever sample pages they already have. With a partial or full, if they have that, you might want to consider the same things, but you're in a better position for the agent to see communications from you. And ideally, they've even given you their personal email. You can ask if they'd like to read what they have now, or if they'd rather wait for your revision or R&R to be ready. And in those cases, you want to give a rough overview of what the R&R will entail, because they might prefer to see the current version instead. Okay. So 39, should I offer my R&R or revision I did for myself to agents who previously rejected? Agents have said they prefer at least 6 months to have passed before you requery. If it was a query rejection, the sample pages should look significantly different, or they'll just reject again. But if they never got past the query letter in the first place, and that hasn't changed, they might reject at that point. So, you decide there whether you think it's worth it to resend to people who rejected your query. Someone who rejected your partial or full is more likely to be willing to take a second or third look. In my experience, the vast majority of agents who rejected my partial or full said yes to seeing a new version after an R&R, because they know that these are like often mini developmental edits. It's a very editorial agent. Some even read or at least perused 3 or 4 different versions of mine, since I did end up doing 4 R&Rs in the end, or 4 revisions in the end. And one of those who did that, who read 3 or 4 versions, was one of the agents who ultimately offered. All right, 40. Oh, 40 is not a slide. I will just read it. How long should I take to do my R&R? All right, advice on this is all over the place. I've seen writers and agents advise that you should take at least X weeks, but no longer than Y weeks, where X and Y are different numbers of weeks, depending on who you're asking. Because otherwise the agent will think you rushed it, is what one group says, or the agent will lose interest or lose your project, is what the other group says, if you take too long. I mean, technically both are possible, but we all work at different paces. R&Rs vary widely in scale as to, how much are you changing? You may want to have critique partners read it or not. They may be fast readers or slow readers. Others point out that if you get a deal down the line, an editor might expect you to turn around edits in 3 weeks, and it won't matter what kind of schedule you keep. So it might be a positive if you work fast, but not everyone works that fast or can. My thought is it's best just to ask the agent for a guideline. The ones I asked said, take as long as you need. And that's the ideal. Your path is your own. So that's the end of my little slideshow. So just stop share. I'm back. Thank you for listening. I hope some of this was helpful. Best of luck to everyone with querying and any R&Rs you might get. I put all my stuff at the very first slide, but you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, or TikTok at Laura Galán-Wells, or there's my spelling. So just be without the hyphen. And my website is lauragalánwells.com. Anyway, thanks for having me, Right Hive.